My family ignored my son Jake's 8th birthday completely, not even a text message. But 2 weeks later, my mother stood in my small apartment living room holding a cream-colored wedding invitation with gold-embossed lettering like it was the Holy Grail, while my sister Melissa perched on my second-hand couch scrolling through Vera Wang wedding dress photos on her phone. "We need $1,800 by next Friday," Melissa announced without looking up from her screen, zooming in on a strapless ivory gown with crystal beading that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "The deposit is due, and Brad's already maxed out covering the venue, so family needs to step up for important moments like this." I stood frozen near my kitchen counter, still wearing my dental hygienist scrubs from my shift at Bright Smiles Dental, watching my mother nod enthusiastically, while Jake sat cross-legged on the floor 8 feet away, building a Lego spaceship with the discount set I'd found at Target, because his actual birthday presents from family had consisted of absolute silence. Not a card, not a phone call, not a single acknowledgement in our family group chat where I'd posted 17 messages in the week leading up to May 4th, including photos of the superhero cake I'd stayed up until midnight baking because Jake deserved something special, even if I had to do everything myself. My phone was still open to that chat. 47 unread messages from me creating a pathetic timeline of my optimism dying in real time, while the only responses had been Melissa posting photos of wedding venue tours and my mother sharing articles about proper wedding etiquette. "Family helps each other during important times," my mother added, smoothing her designer blouse that Melissa had probably bought her. And I felt my hands curl into fists behind my back because Jake's 8th birthday was apparently not an important time, but my sister's 3rd engagement. This time to Bradley Whitmore, a corporate lawyer who made 6 figures and treated restaurant servers like personal assistants, definitely qualified as a family emergency. I had spent the last 2 weeks watching Jake pretend not to care that his grandparents forgot his birthday, that his Aunt Melissa, who used to be his favorite person, didn't even send an emoji. And now these same people stood in my home demanding money I didn't have for a dress that cost more than the entire college fund I'd been building for my son, one painful $50 deposit at a time. "Rachel, we need an answer," Melissa said, finally looking up from her phone with that expression she'd perfected since getting engaged, the one that suggested everyone else's concerns were minor inconveniences interfering with her ascension to wedding royalty. "The boutique closes at 6, and they won't hold the dress without the deposit. Mom and Dad already contributed their share, so now it's your turn to show you actually care about this family. Their share." The words hung in the air while I calculated exactly how much caring they'd demonstrated when Jake turned 8, when he'd asked me 3 times if maybe the mail was just slow this year, if perhaps Grandma Pat had sent a card that got lost, if possibly Aunt Melissa forgot because she was busy with wedding planning. I had watched my son make excuses for people who hadn't thought about him for even 30 seconds, and now those same people wanted $1,800 by next Friday, like I could just manifest money from caring about family hard enough. "I need to think about it," I said carefully, because I had learned over the years that direct confrontation with Melissa went nowhere, that my mother would always take her golden child's side, that being the younger daughter who got pregnant at 23 and never married Jake's father meant my opinions came with an asterisk of poor life choices that invalidated whatever I said. "My budget is tight this month and I need to check what's possible." Melissa's perfectly shaped eyebrows, courtesy of monthly salon appointments I couldn't afford, drew together in theatrical disappointment. "This isn't optional, Rachel. Brad's parents are contributing $20,000. His sister bought her own bridesmaid dress without complaining, and his brother is paying for the rehearsal dinner. Meanwhile, our side of the family looks cheap because you can't manage your money well enough to help your own sister on the most important day of her life." I glanced at Jake, who had stopped building his spaceship and was watching this conversation with the too old understanding of a kid who'd learned early that adults don't always do what they should, that promises get broken, that love comes with conditions he didn't yet understand how to meet. He caught my eye and gave me a small smile that broke something inside my chest because he was trying to make me feel better about adults who should have been making him feel celebrated 2 weeks ago. "Most important day of her life," I repeated slowly, and something in my tone made my mother shift uncomfortably. That's interesting phrasing considering Jake's 8th birthday apparently didn't register as important enough for a text message. The temperature in my small living room dropped about 20 degrees. Melissa's expression flattened into the defensive mask she wore whenever her behavior got called out. "Are you seriously comparing a child's birthday to a wedding? Jake gets a birthday every year. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. 3rd engagement," I said quietly. "Technically, this is your 3rd once-in-a-lifetime event. But who's counting? My mother made a sharp sound of disapproval. Rachel Marie, that's uncalled for. Melissa's previous relationships didn't work out, but Brad is different, and we should all be supportive of her happiness instead of bringing up the past. I posted 47 messages in the family group chat about Jake's birthday, I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling through the evidence I'd been staring at for 2 weeks. Messages that documented my pathetic hope that someone would remember, that family would show up when it mattered. 47, Mom. Party planning, asking if anyone wanted to come over for cake, sharing photos of Jake being excited, and the only responses were Melissa's wedding venue pictures and your articles about proper wedding guest behavior. Melissa stood up abruptly, her designer handbag clutching white-knuckled in her perfectly manicured hands. Oh my God, you're really going to make this about Jake when we're talking about my wedding? This is exactly why you're always struggling, Rachel. You focus on small stuff instead of seeing the bigger picture. Kids don't even remember birthdays from when they're 8. I remember mine, Jake said quietly from the floor, and everyone turned to look at him. I remember that nobody came except Mom, and she made a really good cake even though she was tired from work. The silence that followed was brutal. My mother opened her mouth and then closed it, looking at Jake like she'd genuinely forgotten he was in the room, which perhaps she had because that seemed to be her default setting regarding her only grandchild. Melissa had the decency to look uncomfortable for approximately 3 seconds before her expression hardened into stubborn defensiveness. We've been incredibly busy with wedding planning, Melissa said, directing this to me rather than to Jake because apologizing to an 8-year-old apparently wasn't part of her skill set. There's been so much to coordinate, and honestly, Rachel, you know how overwhelmed I've been. You could have reminded us instead of being passive-aggressive about it. The audacity of that statement, the suggestion that I should have reminded them to acknowledge my child's existence, was so staggering that I actually laughed. I should have reminded you to remember your nephew's birthday. That's your position here. Family helps each other remember things, my mother jumped in, trying to smooth this over with the same platitudes she'd been using my entire life to excuse Melissa's behavior. We all get busy and things slip through the cracks. The important thing is moving forward and supporting each other now. Supporting each other, I repeated, and I felt something shift inside me. Some final thread of caring about their approval or acceptance or whatever I'd been chasing my whole life while coming in second to Melissa's bigger, shinier, more important needs. You want $1,800 by next Friday for a Vera Wang dress, but Jake's birthday wasn't worth a text message. I want to make sure I'm understanding the priorities correctly. Don't be dramatic, Melissa snapped. We're talking about completely different things. You're deliberately trying to make me feel guilty for asking my sister to participate in my wedding like a normal family member. I opened my banking app on my phone, pulled up my transfer screen, and typed Melissa's Venmo username from muscle memory because I'd sent her money before, for previous emergencies that always seemed to be her definition of emergency rather than mine. I entered $1 in the amount field, wrote same value as Jake's birthday gift in the description box, and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The notification sound from Melissa's phone was satisfyingly immediate. She looked down at her screen, confusion crossing her face before understanding dawned, and her expression transformed into pure fury. Are you fucking kidding me right now? $1? You're sending me $1 as some kind of petty statement? Same value as the birthday gift you sent Jake, I said calmly, taking a screenshot of the transaction and opening our family group chat. Seems fair. Rachel, don't you dare, my mother warned, but I was already posting the screenshot along with a new message. Melissa requested $800 for her wedding dress. Same day she valued Jake's 8th birthday at $0. I adjusted my contribution to match her investment in family. Then I scrolled up to the beginning of May and took screenshots of all 47 unanswered messages about Jake's birthday, posting them one after another in rapid succession, creating an undeniable visual record of exactly how much family helping each other had flowed in Jake's direction. You spiteful bitch, Melissa hissed, her phone buzzing repeatedly as our extended family group chat, which included aunts and uncles and cousins, started lighting up with notifications. You're going to regret this. Probably, I agreed, feeling strangely calm despite my mother's shocked expression and Melissa's barely contained rage. But Jake will remember that someone stood up for him when it mattered, even if that someone was only his mom. They left in a storm of slammed doors and hissed threats about family consequences, my mother trying to delete the screenshots from the group chat while family members were already commenting with questions and awkward observations. I stood in my suddenly quiet living room, heart pounding, knowing I'd just burned bridges I'd spent 32 years trying to build, and felt Jake's small hand slip into mine. "That was really cool, Mom," he said, looking up at me with something like awe. "Nobody ever stands up to Aunt Melissa." "Well, someone should," I replied, squeezing his hand while my phone continued exploding with family drama I'd deliberately created, knowing this was just the beginning of whatever came next, but unable to find any regret when I looked at my son's face and saw him finally understanding that he mattered more than keeping peace with people who'd never valued him anyway. The family group chat exploded over the next 48 hours with a digital warfare I'd unknowingly initiated. My Aunt Linda, my father's sister who lived in Seattle, was the first to break ranks with a message that made my phone buzz at 6:30 the following morning. Just scrolled through all these birthday messages Rachel sent. Not one response, not even a happy birthday? That's cold. Then my cousin Marcus, Melissa's age but always the family truth teller, added, "Y'all really forgot Jake's birthday and then asked Rachel for 1-800? I'm not saying she handled it perfectly, but damn, read the room." My mother responded with an essay-length message about how hurtful it was to air family business publicly, how they'd simply been overwhelmed with wedding preparations, and how she was deeply disappointed in my choice to embarrass Melissa during such an important time in her life. My father, who typically stayed out of these conflicts by hiding in his woodworking shed, posted a single sentence: "Rachel should have handled this privately." No acknowledgement of Jake's ignored birthday, no apology, just criticism of my method of pointing out their failure. Melissa's response came at 9 p.m. that first night, a carefully crafted message that positioned her as the victim of my unstable behavior, and included selective screenshots of times I'd asked her for help over the years, conveniently omitting the context that I'd paid her back every single time, or that the help I'd requested was things like, "Can you pick Jake up from school because I have a double shift?" rather than, "Give me $1,800 immediately." She ended with, "I've always supported Rachel even when she made questionable life choices, and this is how she repays me." Some people can't handle other people's happiness. That questionable life choices phrase sent my cousin Jennifer, who'd had her own unplanned pregnancy at 21, into the chat with fire. "Melissa, you mean having a kid? That's the questionable life choice you're referencing? Because I'm pretty sure being a devoted single mom is more admirable than spending money you don't have on a wedding dress while your nephew goes unacknowledged on his birthday." 3 other cousins liked Jennifer's message within minutes, creating visible fault lines in family loyalty I hadn't realized existed. Brad's mother apparently got added to the group chat by my mother in a misguided attempt to show the Whitmore family how unreasonable I was being, but instead Mrs. Whitmore posted, "I'm confused about the context here, but I want to be clear that Bradley's family hasn't asked anyone to contribute to wedding expenses beyond what they voluntarily offered. If there's financial pressure happening, that's not coming from our side." My mother's follow-up explaining that this was about family tradition and supporting each other landed with a thud that even I could feel through the screen. On day 3, my Uncle Robert, my mother's brother who is a financial planner, jumped into the fray with uncomfortable questions. "Pat, didn't you and Bob take out a loan against the house last year? And now you're asking Rachel, who's supporting a kid on a hygienist salary, to contribute $1,800 to a wedding dress? The math isn't mathing." My mother's response about how they'd managed their finances appropriately got immediately contradicted by my uncle posting, "You called me 6 months ago asking about restructuring debt. Stop acting like you're flush with cash while pressuring your daughter who actually budgets responsibly." I watched this unfold with growing fascination, contributing nothing after my initial screenshot dump because the family was doing my work for me, asking questions I'd been too conditioned to ask, pointing out hypocrisies I'd been trained to ignore. Jake noticed my obsessive phone checking during breakfast before school and asked if I was okay, which snapped me back to reality enough to put the phone away and focus on making his lunch. But the notifications kept buzzing like angry hornets throughout my morning at work. Dr. Morrison, the dentist I worked for, noticed my distraction during a routine cleaning and gently asked if everything was all right at home. I gave her the abbreviated version while sanitizing instruments, and her reaction surprised me. "Good for you. I have 3 sisters, and the golden child dynamic is real. Sometimes you have to draw a line or they'll walk over you forever." She paused, then added, "Also, who forgets an 8-year-old's birthday? That's not being busy. That's being checked out." The validation from someone outside my family structure felt like oxygen after years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to understand how hard things were for Melissa with her demanding career and now wedding planning. Dr. Morrison's straightforward assessment that my family's behavior was actually unacceptable, not just my perception that needed adjusting, made something crystallize in my mind about how much I'd been gaslighting myself to maintain relationships with people who fundamentally didn't prioritize Jake or me. That afternoon, while Jake was at his after-school program, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went through my bank records and calculated exactly how much family support had flowed in which directions over the past 5 years. The spreadsheet I created was damning. I'd loaned Melissa money 4 times, totaling $3,200, which she'd repaid late or not at all with various excuses. I'd driven my parents to medical appointments 17 times when my father had knee surgery, using my gas money and taking unpaid time off work. I'd watched my cousin's kids 6 times for overnight babysitting when I could have been picking up extra shifts. Meanwhile, the reciprocal support I'd received amounted to my mother watching Jake exactly twice in 5 years, both times after I'd begged because my backup childcare fell through. The financial imbalance was stark, but the emotional imbalance was worse. I scrolled through years of text messages where I'd asked for help or support and received either silence or lectures about better planning. Messages where I'd shared Jake's accomplishments met with one-word responses, while Melissa's career updates generated paragraph-long celebrations. Birthday acknowledgments for Jake had been declining steadily over the years, from cards and small gifts when he was a toddler to absolutely nothing this year, while Melissa's birthdays still commanded family dinner parties that I was expected to attend and contribute dishes to. I was documenting systemic neglect, and seeing it quantified in data made my anger sharpen into something more focused than the messy hurt I'd been carrying. This wasn't about one forgotten birthday or one unreasonable financial demand. This was a pattern of my family treating Jake and me as secondary characters in the Melissa show, and I'd been so busy trying to earn my way into being valued that I'd never stopped to question whether these people deserved my effort. That evening, my father called for the first time since the group chat explosion. "Rachel, this has gone far enough," he said without preamble, his voice carrying that disappointed principal tone he'd perfected during my teenage years. "You've made your point and embarrassed your sister publicly. Now it's time to apologize and move forward like adults." "Apologize for what specifically?" I asked, putting him on speaker while I chopped vegetables for Jake's dinner. "For pointing out that you all forgot Jake's birthday? Or for declining to give Melissa $1,800 I don't have? For airing family business in the group chat instead of handling it privately?" he said, as if the method of my complaint was more offensive than the neglect I was complaining about. "You know how these things should be handled. You call your mother or talk to Melissa directly instead of creating drama that involves the entire extended family." "I did handle it privately," I countered, my knife hitting the cutting board with more force than necessary. "I sent 47 messages about Jake's birthday that everyone ignored privately. Then Melissa came to my apartment demanding money, and I made a decision about how to respond. If the response embarrassed her, maybe the behavior that prompted it should have been embarrassing enough to prevent." My father sighed heavily, the sound of a man who believed his reasonableness was being tested by an irrational daughter. "Your mother and I have been planning to send Jake a birthday gift. We've just been busy with helping Melissa with wedding preparations. You're acting like we don't care about our grandson when we're simply dealing with a lot right now." "It's been 3 weeks, Dad," I said flatly. "You've had time to transfer Melissa money for a dress, but not 90 seconds to send Jake a text message. And before you tell me again that I should have reminded you, I want you to think about what that means, that I should have to remind you my child exists and deserves acknowledgement from his grandparents." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken arguments he knew wouldn't land well if said out loud. Finally, "Melissa is very upset. She's talking about uninviting you from the wedding if you don't apologize." "Then I guess I'm not going to the wedding," I replied, surprised by how little that threat bothered me. "Saves me having to buy a bridesmaid dress I can't afford for a celebration of people who don't celebrate my son." "You're being incredibly selfish," my father said, and I could hear my mother's coaching in his phrasing. "This isn't about keeping score of who did what. Family means showing up for each other during important moments, and Melissa's wedding is an important moment whether you want to acknowledge it or not." I set down my knife and picked up my phone, taking him off speaker. "Dad, what's Jake's favorite color?" "What? His favorite color? What is it?" Silence. "What about his teacher's name? Or his best friend's name? What sport did he start playing this year?" I waited, giving him time to answer questions any involved grandparent should know immediately. "You can't answer because you don't know, because you don't ask, because Jake isn't important enough to you to learn basic details about his life. But you want me to show up for Melissa's 3rd engagement celebration and pretend we're a close, supportive family. Do you see the disconnect?" That's not fair, he started, but I interrupted. His favorite color is orange. His teacher is Mrs. Patterson. His best friend is Connor from his soccer team, which he joined in March. These are things you'd know if you ever asked about him instead of just lecturing me about my life choices. I paused. I'm not apologizing to Melissa, and I'm not going to the wedding. If that makes me selfish in your eyes, I can live with that better than I can live with teaching Jake. That family means accepting scraps while giving everything. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of finally saying things I'd been swallowing for years. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, having clearly heard at least part of the conversation. Are we really not going to Aunt Melissa's wedding? Do you want to go? I asked honestly. He thought about it for a moment with the seriousness he applied to important questions. Not really. She's kind of mean to you, and Grandma always tells me to be quiet when adults are talking. Plus, Brad doesn't know how to talk to kids. He just asks about school like he's interviewing me for a job. I laughed despite everything. Those are all valid reasons. We'll skip it and do something fun that day instead, just you and me. Can we go to that trampoline park you said was too expensive? Absolutely, I said, making a mental note to budget for it. We'll make our own celebration. The family group chat continued its civil war throughout the week, with clear sides forming. My mother's generation largely defended Melissa with varying degrees of conviction, while my generation and younger asked increasingly pointed questions about the double standards. My cousin Sarah posted a comparison of group chat engagement for various family members' life events that was devastatingly clear about who got enthusiastic responses versus who got crickets. And several people quietly left the chat rather than continue participating in the dysfunction. On Friday, the day Melissa's dress deposit was supposedly due, she posted a melodramatic message about having to choose a different, less expensive dress because her own sister couldn't support her during the most important day of her life, complete with photos of the Vera Wang gown she'd dreamed of since childhood, a demonstrable lie since we'd grown up solidly middle class, and wedding dress dreams weren't part of our childhood. The manipulation was so transparent that even some of her usual defenders seemed uncomfortable with the performance. I didn't respond. I was done performing my role in their dysfunction. Instead, I took Jake to his favorite pizza place, let him order whatever toppings he wanted, and listened to him talk about the solar system project he was building for school. His excitement about Jupiter's moons and whether there might be alien life in Europa's oceans was worth more than any family approval I'd been chasing. But that night, alone after Jake was asleep, I lay in bed staring at my phone and wondering what I'd just done to my family relationships, whether I'd overreacted, whether I should have just quietly given Melissa the money to keep the peace. The doubts crept in like they always did, whispering that maybe I was too sensitive, too unwilling to compromise, too quick to take offense. Then I remembered Jake asking if maybe the mail was just slow this year, making excuses for adults who didn't deserve them, and my resolve hardened again into something like certainty. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn a place in this family structure that valued me only as a supporting character. Maybe it was time to write myself out of their story entirely, and focus on the small, honest family I'd built with my son, where love didn't come with conditions and birthdays actually mattered. The week after I declined the wedding invitation, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced while Jake was at school, her face carefully composed into what I recognized as her serious conversation expression. She'd brought store-bought cookies, which immediately told me this wasn't a social visit since my mother only bought cookies when she was trying to soften me up for something unpleasant. "We need to talk about your behavior," she said, settling onto my couch without being invited, arranging the cookie plate on my coffee table like she was staging a hostage negotiation. "Your father and I have been discussing this situation, and we think you need to understand the larger picture of what you're destroying." I stayed standing near my kitchen counter, arms crossed, recognizing this tactic from a lifetime of similar conversations, where my perspective got framed as a problem that needed correction. "I'm listening. Melissa is devastated," my mother began, and I almost laughed at the predictability. "She's been crying every night since you uninvited yourself from the wedding. Brad's family is asking questions about why the bride's sister won't be there, and she's having to make excuses about family conflict that makes our entire family look dysfunctional." "We are dysfunctional," I pointed out. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." My mother's jaw tightened. "Every family has conflicts, Rachel. The difference is that mature people work through them privately instead of broadcasting them to everyone and creating permanent damage. Your Aunt Linda has been calling me asking invasive questions about how we treat Jake. Your Uncle Robert is making comments about our finances, And several cousins have told Melissa they're uncomfortable attending the wedding now because of the drama you created. The drama I created by posting screenshots of messages everyone in that chat could already see? I asked. Or the drama of pointing out that my son's birthday wasn't worth acknowledging, but Melissa's dress was worth $1,800 I don't have? You're twisting everything, my mother said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and modulated back to reasonable tones. Nobody forgot Jake's birthday intentionally. We were simply overwhelmed with helping Melissa during an incredibly stressful time in her life. Planning a wedding is enormously complicated, and your sister needed support from her family. I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out the spreadsheet I'd created, the one documenting 5 years of unequal family support. Mom, I want to show you something. I handed her printed copies of the data, watching her face as she scanned the numbers. That's every time I've asked for help versus every time I've been asked to give help. Every dollar I've loaned versus dollars loaned to me. Every time I've shown up for someone versus times people showed up for me. She barely glanced at it before setting the papers aside. Life isn't a spreadsheet, Rachel. You can't quantify relationships with numbers. Some people need more support during certain seasons of life. And right now, Melissa is in a season where she needs her family around her. Jake needed his family on his birthday, I said quietly. That was his season of needing support. Nobody showed up. He's 8 years old, my mother replied. And there it was, the core belief that made everything else make sense. Children don't have the same emotional needs as adults facing major life transitions. Jake won't remember this birthday in 5 years, but Melissa will remember that her sister boycotted her wedding for the rest of her life. The casual dismissal of Jake's emotional reality, the assumption that children's feelings mattered less than adult convenience, crystallized something I'd been circling around for weeks. My mother genuinely believed that Jake's hurt was less valid than Melissa's disappointment, that an 8-year-old being ignored by his entire extended family was insignificant compared to a 35-year-old not getting the exact wedding dress she wanted. He'll remember, I said firmly. Kids remember when they're not important to the adults who are supposed to love them. I remember being 12 and watching you drop everything to help Melissa move apartments for the 3rd time in 1 year. But when I needed help with a school project, you told me to figure it out myself because you were too busy. I remember being 16 and listening to you brag about Melissa's college acceptances while barely acknowledging my straight A report card. I remember my entire childhood of being the afterthought while Melissa was the main event. My mother's expression shifted into defensive offense. That's absolutely unfair. We've always treated you girls equally. If you felt neglected, that's your perception, not reality. Melissa needed more guidance because she was navigating more complex situations. You were always more independent, more capable of handling things on your own, more trained to not expect help. I corrected. There's a difference. She stood abruptly, leaving the cookies untouched on my table. I came here hoping we could have a rational conversation about repairing this family breach before it becomes permanent. Instead, you're dredging up ancient history and making accusations that frankly sound like you need therapy to process whatever grudges you've been holding on to. I am in therapy, I said. Started last week. My therapist thinks it's interesting that you're framing my boundary setting as grudge holding. My mother's face went through several expressions before landing on wounded dignity. Well, I hope your therapist can help you understand that family requires compromise and forgiveness. Your father and I have forgiven you for many things over the years: your unplanned pregnancy, your decision to keep Jake without being married, your struggles with money management. We've supported you despite our disappointments. The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered as if she were being generous, made my chest tight. You've forgiven me for having Jake? My son's existence required your forgiveness? You know what I meant. She backpedaled. Don't twist my words. I'm repeating your words exactly, I said. You just said you forgave me for keeping Jake, as if my son is something I did wrong that you've graciously overlooked. This is exactly why we can't have productive conversations with you, my mother snapped, her composure finally cracking. You pick apart everything anyone says looking for offense instead of understanding the spirit of what's being communicated. Yes, we were disappointed when you got pregnant so young by a man who wasn't going to stick around. That's a normal parental reaction. But we've moved past that and accepted Jake. And now you're holding grudges about word choices from years ago. You said it 30 seconds ago, Mom. Not years ago. Just now. She grabbed her purse, the cookies abandoned on my table like failed peace offerings. I'm done trying to reason with you. When you're ready to act like an adult and repair what you've broken, you know where to find us. But understand that if you don't apologize to Melissa and attend her wedding, There will be consequences for your relationship with this family." "What relationship?" I asked, and watched the question land like a slap. What am I losing that I actually have? Sunday dinners I don't get invited to anymore? Holiday gatherings where Jake and I sit in the corner being tolerated? Phone calls that only come when someone needs something from me? My mother left without answering, her exit punctuated by a door slam that rattled my cheap apartment walls. I stood in the sudden silence, shaking slightly from adrenaline, and noticed she'd left her expensive purse behind on my couch. I grabbed it and ran into the hallway, catching her at the elevator. "You forgot this," I said, handing it over. She took it without thanks, her eyes cold. "Your Aunt Carol asked me yesterday if the rumors are true that you've been keeping Jake away from family deliberately, poisoning him against us. I had to explain that no, you're just going through something and making poor decisions. Don't make me a liar, Rachel." The elevator doors closed on her disappointed face, and I stood there processing what she'd just revealed. Family members were creating narratives where I was the villain, where my very reasonable response to being ignored and exploited was being reframed as instability and vindictiveness. They were closing ranks around Melissa, which meant closing me out, and my mother had just delivered what she thought was a threat, but actually sounded like freedom. Back in my apartment, I called my therapist, Dr. K, and asked for an emergency session. She fit me in during her lunch hour, and I spent 45 minutes unpacking the conversation with my mother, the casual cruelty disguised as concern, the gaslighting about my memories and perceptions. "You're experiencing what happens when someone stops participating in a dysfunctional family system," Dr. K explained. "The system needs you to play your role, which is the daughter who tries harder, who accepts less, who doesn't make waves. When you step out of that role, the system fights to pull you back in, usually by escalating consequences until you comply." "So I should expect things to get worse?" I asked. "Probably," she said honestly. "But here's what I want you to remember. Worse by whose definition? If your family excludes you from events that make you feel terrible anyway, is that actually worse? If they stop calling except to criticize, is that worse than calls that already only criticized? Sometimes the consequences they threaten are actually freedoms in disguise." That night, Jake and I made homemade pizza together, his small hands stretching dough while he chattered about his day at school. He didn't ask about my mother's visit or the ongoing family drama. He was just happy, just present, just my kid who deserved better than being collateral damage in adult dysfunction. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls from Melissa, my father, and several family members. My voicemail was full of increasingly frantic messages about a situation that required immediate family discussion. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through texts that mentioned legal consultation and protecting family assets, and I had a sick feeling this was about to escalate beyond group chat drama. I called my father back during my lunch break at work, and his voice was tight with controlled anger. "We need to meet today, all of us. There's something you need to explain." "Explain what?" I asked, confused. "The college fund we set up for Jake," he said. "The one we've been contributing to since he was born. You're listed as custodian, and we need to discuss some irregularities that have come to light." My blood went cold. I was custodian on Jake's college fund because my parents had insisted when he was born that they wanted to contribute monthly, that it would be easier if the account was in my name with them as contributors. But I'd never touched that money. Never even looked at the statements because I'd been so grateful they were investing in Jake's future, when they'd been lukewarm about his existence initially. "What irregularities?" I asked carefully. "We'll discuss it in person," my father said. 5 o'clock, at our house. Don't bring Jake." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone with mounting dread about what trap I was walking into. I called my Uncle Robert, the financial planner who'd already broken ranks by questioning my parents' financial decisions in the group chat. "Uncle Robert, do you know anything about Jake's college fund? Dad just called saying there are irregularities and I need to explain something, but I don't even know what he's talking about." There was a long pause. "Rachel, honey, you should probably pull the account statements yourself before that meeting. I don't know details, but I heard your mother talking to your aunt about how you've been irresponsible with money, and they're considering removing you as custodian." "I haven't touched that account," I protested. "I don't even have the login information anymore. They set it up and managed it. I just signed the custodian paperwork." "Then you definitely need those statements before you walk into that meeting," he advised. because something tells me you're being set up to take blame for something you didn't do. I spent my afternoon pulling account records, creating login credentials, and discovering that my uncle's instincts were correct. The college fund that should have held roughly $18,000 based on 8 years of promised monthly contributions held exactly $3,216. $15,000 had disappeared over the past 2 years through withdrawals I'd never authorized, never seen, never knew about. I printed everything, highlighted the withdrawal dates and amounts, and cross-referenced them with my own calendar. The timing was damning, large withdrawals coinciding with Melissa's engagement party, her shower, and wedding venue deposit. My parents had raided Jake's college fund to pay for Melissa's wedding, then were apparently planning to blame me for the missing money. At 4:45, I sat in my car outside my parents' house, reviewing my documentation and texting Tyler about where I was in case this meeting went badly. Then I walked in, prepared to defend myself against people I'd never imagined would steal from their own grandson to cover for their golden child's expensive demands. My parents sat at their formal dining table with Melissa and Brad flanking them like some twisted family tribunal, and the carefully arranged staging told me this meeting had been planned as an ambush. Brad had a leather portfolio in front of him, the kind lawyers used for intimidation, and Melissa's expression was a mix of righteous anger and something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. "Rachel, thank you for coming," my father began with false formality, as if I'd had any choice after his command. "We've asked Brad to join us because this situation has potential legal implications that require professional guidance." I set my folder of account statements on the table with deliberate care. "Before we start whatever this is, I want to be clear that I've pulled complete records for Jake's college fund account. Every transaction, every statement, every withdrawal for the past 8 years. I have all of it documented." Brad's expression flickered with something that might have been respect or might have been irritation, that I'd preempted their strategy. My mother's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "That's exactly what we need to discuss. The fund has significantly less money than it should, and as custodian, you're responsible for accounting for the missing amounts. The missing amounts that you withdrew," I said flatly, opening my folder and sliding the highlighted statements across the table. $15,200 removed from Jake's account over the past 22 months. Want to guess what dates these withdrawals correspond to? I laid out a second sheet showing Melissa's engagement party, bridal shower, and wedding venue deposit dates, each withdrawal happening within 48 hours of her events. The parallel timeline was damning, and watching my father's jaw tighten told me he knew exactly how bad this looked. "Those withdrawals were loans," my mother said quickly, improvising on the spot. "Temporary loans that we fully intended to repay before Jake needed the money for college. You weren't supposed to be checking the account, and the fact that you were shows a lack of trust in your own parents. Loans I never authorized and never knew about," I corrected. "Loans from money you told me you were contributing to Jake's future, not borrowing for Melissa's wedding expenses. Also, legally speaking, you can't loan money from an account I'm custodian on without my signature. Which brings us to an interesting question about how you access that money at all." Brad leaned forward, his lawyer mask firmly in place. "Rachel, I think we can all agree this is a family matter that shouldn't involve legal scrutiny. Your parents made some financial decisions that perhaps weren't properly documented, but their intentions were good. They planned to restore the funds well before Jake reaches college age. With what money?" I asked directly. "Uncle Robert mentioned you'd taken a loan against your house last year. If you had $15,000 lying around to restore Jake's fund, why did you ask me for $1,800 for a wedding dress you couldn't afford?" The silence that followed was brutal. Melissa looked at our parents with dawning horror, apparently just now realizing they'd funded her wedding by stealing from her nephew's education. Brad's expression had shifted from professional neutrality to assessment, clearly recalculating the financial stability of his future in-laws. "We had some unexpected expenses," my father said defensively. "The house needed a new roof, your mother's car required major repairs, and helping Melissa with wedding costs was important to us. We prioritized immediate needs with full intention of rebuilding Jake's account once those situations stabilized. You prioritized Melissa's wants over Jake's education," I clarified. "And then you called this meeting to blame me for the missing money, hoping I wouldn't have pulled statements, hoping you could gaslight me into believing I'd somehow mismanaged an account I never touched. That's not what this meeting was about," my mother protested, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "We wanted to discuss restructuring the account and creating a repayment plan together as a family." I pulled out a third document, one I'd printed that afternoon after a disturbing discovery. "Mom, you signed withdrawal forms using my electronic signature. The bank sent me copies once I established new login credentials. That's forgery. You forged my signature to steal from your grandson's college fund. Brad actually flinched. My mother's face went from pale to blotchy red. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against hardwood. Now you listen here, young lady. We've supported you and Jake for 8 years when you had nobody else. We have every right to access money that wouldn't exist without our contributions in the first place. Money held in trust for Jake, under my custodianship, access through forged signatures, I said, my voice remarkably steady considering my hands were shaking. Brad, do you want to explain to everyone what the legal implications of that are, or should I contact my own lawyer? Brad set down his expensive pen with deliberate precision. Rachel, let me be very clear that I'm here as Melissa's fiancé, not as anyone's legal counsel. But yes, if what you're describing is accurate, unauthorized access to a custodial account through forged documentation could constitute fraud. However, family matters like this rarely benefit from legal escalation. Translation: you can prove they committed fraud, but he's advising me not to prosecute, I said. Interesting that family forgiveness only flows in one direction. When I decline to fund Melissa's dress, I'm selfish and destroying the family. When you steal from Jake's future, I should let it go because family doesn't sue family. Melissa had been uncharacteristically quiet, but she finally found her voice. Nobody stole anything. Mom and Dad were going to pay it back. You're making this into some huge crime when it was just temporary financial juggling that every family does. Every family commits fraud? I asked. Every family steals from 8-year-olds? Your normal is so warped that you think this is acceptable? You've always been jealous of me, Melissa shot back, her composure cracking. Always looking for reasons to make me the villain because I've been more successful, because Mom and Dad are proud of my career and my marriage to Brad. You can't stand that I'm happy, so you're sabotaging my wedding and turning everyone against me with your victim narrative. The projection was so complete, so utterly lacking in self-awareness, that I almost admired its audacity. Melissa, I posted screenshots of messages that everyone could already see. I documented facts. If those facts make you look bad, maybe examine the behavior, not my decision to stop pretending it didn't happen. Girls, that's enough, my father interjected with his mediator voice. We're all upset and saying things we don't mean. Rachel, your mother and I will set up a repayment plan for Jake's account. We'll have the $15,000 restored within 18 months. In exchange, we expect you to stop this campaign of painting us as villains and repair your relationship with your sister. We'll forgive the public embarrassment and welcome you back into the family if you agree to move forward positively. I stared at him, at all of them, and felt something fundamental shift in my chest. They'd stolen from my child, forged my signature, planned to blame me for their theft, and now were offering to forgive me for exposing them. The audacity would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly representative of our entire family dynamic. No, I said simply. No, my mother repeated, as if she'd never heard me use the word. No forgiveness, no moving forward positively, no pretending this didn't happen, I clarified. You stole from Jake. You forged my signature. You plan to blame me. And your offer is that you'll slowly pay back what you stole if I shut up about it? That's not how this works. What do you want, Rachel? My father asked, his patience visibly thinning. What will it take for you to be satisfied? I want the full $15,000 restored to Jake's account within 30 days, I said, watching their faces. I want a written admission of what you did, signed by both of you. I want my name removed as custodian so you can never access that account again. And I want you to understand that Jake and I are done pretending you're family to us in any meaningful way. That's completely unreasonable, my mother gasped. We don't have $15,000 available in 30 days. The repayment plan your father suggested is more than generous considering you haven't contributed anything to that account yourself. I've contributed 8 years of tolerating your treatment of my son, I replied. 8 years of accepting scraps while watching you pour everything into Melissa. 8 years of Jake making excuses for grandparents who can't be bothered to remember his birthday. That contribution is done. I stood, gathering my documents. Brad was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, something calculating behind his professional facade. Melissa looked between our parents and me like she was watching something crack that she'd always assumed was solid. 3 weeks later, I sat in a coffee shop across from Brad Whitmore, alone, which was bizarre enough that I'd almost declined when he'd texted asking to meet. Melissa doesn't know I'm here, he said immediately, his lawyer composure cracking around the edges. And I need you to understand I'm taking a significant risk by having this conversation. I waited, my hand wrapped around a coffee I hadn't touched, while Brad pulled out his own folder of documents. Your parents haven't told Melissa the full extent of their financial situation. They've borrowed against the house twice in 18 months, maxed out 3 credit cards funding wedding expenses, and as of last week, your mother's real estate license is under review because of complaints about misrepresented properties. Why are you telling me this? I asked carefully. Because $15,000 doesn't exist, he said bluntly. They can't restore Jake's fund in 30 days or even 6 months. My firm ran a background check before the engagement, standard procedure for partners, and your parents' financials are catastrophic. They're 3 months from losing the house. My stomach dropped. And Melissa has no idea. She thinks they're comfortably retired. He paused. I also found something else while reviewing the college fund documentation. Your mother has been accessing that account for longer than 2 years. The initial contributions were real, but she's been making withdrawals and replacements like a shell game since Jake was 5. The net result is she's effectively stolen about $28,000 total. I sat back, the betrayal somehow worse knowing it had been systematic for years. Why are you telling me all this? Brad's expression was carefully neutral. Because I can't marry into a family that's committed fraud, especially fraud that could touch my professional reputation. But I need you to file that police report you threatened. If you don't, I have to be the one who reports it, and that destroys Melissa in a different way. The calculation was cold and clear. He wanted me to be the villain who destroyed the wedding so he could walk away clean. You want me to do your dirty work. I want the truth documented before I extricate myself from this situation, he corrected. Your parents forged financial documents. That's a crime regardless of who reports it. But if you file, it's a daughter protecting her son. If I file, it's a lawyer abandoning his fiancée over her family's problems. He slid a business card across the table. This is Detective Chen, Financial Crimes Division. She's expecting your call. He left me sitting there with evidence of systematic theft and the uncomfortable knowledge that I was about to detonate my family's entire structure. I called Dr. K from the parking lot. He's using you, she confirmed after I explained. But that doesn't make the core facts less true. Your parents committed fraud. Jake's future was stolen. Whether Brad's motivations are pure doesn't change whether you should protect your son. I called Detective Chen that afternoon. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, detectives had interviewed my parents, confirmed the forged signatures, documented the withdrawals, and built a fraud case that my father's lawyer told him was unwinnable. My mother had kept meticulous records of every cent she'd taken, apparently believing her own justifications about borrowing made it legal. Brad called off the wedding 4 days before the ceremony with a tersely worded explanation about undisclosed family circumstances that make proceeding inadvisable. Melissa called me screaming, blamed me for destroying her happiness, and promised I'd regret this for the rest of my life. My parents' house went into foreclosure as legal bills mounted. The extended family group chat exploded and then went silent as people chose sides or simply opted out of the disaster entirely. Uncle Robert called to tell me I'd done the right thing, but that Thanksgiving was probably going to be awkward. My cousin Jennifer sent a text that just said, "Fucking finally, someone held them accountable." The criminal charges were reduced to a plea deal where my parents admitted to financial fraud, paid restitution of $15,000 from the forced sale of their house, and served 2 years probation. Melissa moved back in with them in their rental apartment and refused all contact with me. My mother sent one letter, delivered through my uncle, that said, "I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed your family over money." I didn't respond. 2 years after the police report, I stood in Jake's new bedroom in the small house I'd managed to buy with a combination of the restored college fund money, careful saving, and a promotion to office manager at Dr. Morrison's practice. Jake was 10 now, taller and more confident, carefully arranging his astronomy posters on walls that actually belonged to us. "Mom, can Connor sleep over this weekend?" he called from his room. "His dad said it's fine if it's okay with you." "Sure, honey," I replied, feeling the casual normalcy of that exchange like a gift. Sleepovers and birthday parties and school projects, the ordinary texture of childhood that had been overshadowed by adult dysfunction for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Dinner at 7? Bringing that dessert Jake likes." We'd been dating seriously for a year now, taking it slow because I'd needed time to rebuild my ability to trust, but he'd been patient and steady and genuinely good with Jake in ways that mattered. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find Melissa standing on my porch, looking smaller than I remembered, her designer clothes replaced by Target basics. "I'm not here to apologize," she said immediately. "But I need you to know that you were right about Brad. He was using all of us, and I was too stupid to see it. I didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway while she explained how Brad had left her with debts from the wedding cancellation, how she'd lost her job during the investigation fallout, how our parents blamed her for the financial charges because she'd asked for money they didn't have. Mom and Dad are working retail now to make rent, she said. They hate me almost as much as they hate you. I don't hate them, I said truthfully. I just don't trust them, and I won't expose Jake to people who steal from children and then blame the victims. He's my nephew, Melissa said, her voice cracking. I should know my nephew. You had 8 years to know him, I replied. You chose not to. That's not something that gets fixed with one conversation on my doorstep now that your life fell apart. She left without the absolution she'd been seeking, and I closed the door on the family I'd spent decades trying to earn love from. It should have hurt more than it did, but mostly I felt quiet relief that the performance was finally over. That night, after Connor's sleepover was confirmed and Tyler's visit planned, I found Jake in his room reading a book about Mars. Hey, buddy, can I ask you something? Sure, Mom. Do you miss having grandparents and aunt around? He thought about it with his characteristic seriousness. Sometimes, but mostly I'm glad we're not pretending anymore. Connor's grandparents actually act like they like him, and I always knew ours were just kind of tolerating me. This is better. I hugged him tightly. My son who'd learned too young that biology doesn't guarantee love, but who'd emerged from that knowledge stronger and clearer about what real family meant. We'd built something small and honest from the ruins of dysfunction, and there was absolutely nothing about that I regretted. The college fund now held $32,000. The restored theft, plus my monthly contributions, plus growth. My parents' consequences had been legal and social and financial, exactly proportional to their crime. Melissa's life had imploded under the weight of choices she'd made and bridges she'd burned. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt either. They'd planted the seeds of their own destruction years ago by choosing favoritism over fairness, status over substance, and their golden child's wants over their grandson's needs. I'd just finally stopped making myself small enough to fit in their broken family structure, and the life Jake and I had built in the aftermath was infinitely better than the one we'd been trying to earn from people incapable of giving it. Some families are born, some are built, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from the first to create the second.